The horizon stretched endlessly over the Frostvale Valley, a sprawling expanse of windswept fields bordered by snow-capped mountains. Winter had gripped the land with its icy fingers, painting the earth in muted whites and grays. Among the serene landscape stood a solitary figure, a magnificent chestnut mare named Aurora. Her coat shimmered with a golden-red hue even in the pale light of the overcast sky, and her dark, soulful eyes seemed to hold an untold story. Aurora had belonged to the Clarke family for years, and her intelligence and grace were unmatched in the small rural town they called home. Martha Clarke, a widowed woman in her late 40s with kind blue eyes and a strong, capable frame, had spent most of her life tending to the family farm. Her teenage son, Owen, was her constant companion and helper. At 17, Owen had a lean build and messy brown hair that he constantly brushed out of his hazel eyes. Together, they had rebuilt the farm after years of hardship, with Aurora as their faithful companion. Before we continue with the video and dive deeper into the incredible story, I want to ask for your help. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and your support would mean the world to me. If you've been enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. One icy morning, as Martha finished feeding the livestock, she noticed Aurora behaving strangely. The mare had trotted to the far edge of the field, her body still and rigid, staring at the distant horizon. Her ears twitched as if straining to catch a sound too faint for human ears. Martha called out to her, but Aurora didn't move. "Something wrong, girl?" Martha murmured, walking across the snowy field to join the horse. Aurora remained fixed on the horizon, her breath puffing in soft clouds as she stood sentinel. Owen joined his mother, squinting at the distant mountains. "What's she looking at?" he asked. "No idea," Martha replied, stroking Aurora's neck gently. "She's been like this for an hour." The mare snorted softly, her tail flicking, but she didn't break her gaze. Martha and Owen exchanged puzzled glances. Aurora was known for her calm temperament, but this behavior was entirely new. Over the next few days, Aurora's fixation on the horizon continued. Each morning, she would make her way to the same spot, standing motionless as if waiting for something or someone. Martha began to worry, wondering if the mare was unwell. She called Dr. Emily Harper, a veterinarian from the nearby town, to examine Aurora. Emily was in her mid-30s, with a warm demeanor and a no-nonsense approach to her work. She arrived bundled in a thick jacket, her dark hair pulled into a practical braid. She examined Aurora thoroughly, checking her eyes, ears, and overall condition. "She's healthy," Emily concluded, though her brow furrowed in thought. "This kind of behavior is unusual, but it's not uncommon for horses to pick up on things humans can't. It could be an animal in the distance or something else entirely." Martha nodded, though Emily's words didn't ease her concerns. Aurora's strange behavior had begun to feel like more than a simple quirk. That evening, as the family sat by the fire, Owen brought up Aurora again. "Do you think it's just an animal she's sensing? She's never acted like this before." Martha shook her head, staring into the flames. "I don't know, Owen. It feels different." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden sharp neigh from outside. Martha and Owen exchanged startled glances before rushing to the door. Aurora was standing in her usual spot, her posture tense and her ears pricked forward. This time, however, she was pawing the ground anxiously. "What is it, girl?" Martha whispered, approaching cautiously. Owen scanned the horizon but saw only the dark outline of the mountains against the evening sky. Still, Aurora's agitation was undeniable. The following morning, the first rays of sunlight revealed an unexpected sight. Tracks, large and unfamiliar, cut through the snow at the edge of the field. They led toward the distant mountains, where a storm brewed ominously. Martha and Owen knelt by the tracks, their breath visible in the frigid air. "What could have made these?" Owen asked, running his hand over the indentations. "I don't know," Martha admitted, unease settling in her chest. The prints were unlike anything she'd seen before. Too large for a deer, too deep for a wolf, and oddly spaced, as if made by something dragging itself through the snow. Aurora let out a low, insistent whinny, drawing their attention. She tossed her head toward the horizon, her dark eyes imploring them to follow the trail. "She wants us to go," Owen said, his voice barely above a whisper. Martha hesitated. The idea of venturing into the mountains was daunting, especially with a storm approaching. But Aurora's urgency was undeniable, and something about the situation stirred a deep sense of foreboding within her. "All right," Martha said finally. "We'll follow it, but we need to be prepared." The air was bitterly cold as Martha and Owen prepared for their journey. Aurora waited patiently by the fence, her breath forming soft clouds in the icy morning air. Martha packed a small satchel with essentials: water, dried meat, a first aid kit, and a heavy wool blanket. Owen, ever practical, loaded their small sled with extra supplies, including lanterns and a thick rope. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Owen asked, his voice uncertain as he tightened the straps on his boots. "What if we don't find anything?" Martha paused, her gloved hands resting on Aurora's reins. "I don't know what we'll find, Owen, but I can't shake the feeling that Aurora's trying to tell us something." Owen nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Let's go then." They mounted Aurora and set off, the mare's powerful legs carrying them across the snow-covered fields. The tracks in the snow stretched endlessly ahead, leading them toward the looming silhouette of the mountains. The forest surrounding Frostvale Valley grew denser as they approached, the towering pines casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. Aurora moved with purpose, her steps deliberate as she followed the trail. Martha held the reins loosely, trusting the mare's instincts. Owen walked beside them, his eyes scanning the trees for any signs of movement. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their feet and the occasional rustling of wind through the branches. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the tracks became more distinct. They were large and deeply pressed into the snow with an odd claw-like pattern that sent a shiver down Martha's spine. "What do you think made these?" Owen asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I don't know," Martha admitted. "But whatever it is, it's big." Aurora snorted softly, her ears flicking back and forth. She stopped abruptly, her nostrils flaring as she let out a low warning whinny. "What is it, girl?" Martha asked, leaning forward in the saddle. Owen raised the lantern he carried, its warm light casting a faint glow over the trail ahead. The tracks veered sharply to the left, leading toward a narrow, rocky path that ascended into the mountains. Martha frowned. "It's getting steeper. Are you up for this, Owen?" Owen met her gaze, his hazel eyes resolute. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." They continued along the rocky path, the terrain growing increasingly treacherous. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold that seeped through their layers of clothing. Aurora navigated the narrow trail with surprising agility, her hooves finding steady footing even on the slick rocks. As they climbed higher, the storm on the horizon began to close in. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blotting out the sun and casting the landscape in an ominous shadow. Snowflakes began to fall, light at first but quickly intensifying into a heavy flurry. "We need to find shelter," Martha said, raising her voice to be heard over the wind. "The storm's getting worse." Owen scanned the mountainside, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a cluster of large boulders forming a natural alcove. "Over there!" They guided Aurora toward the shelter, relieved to find it provided some protection from the elements. Owen quickly set to work, building a small fire, his hands trembling from the cold as he struck the flint. The flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow that seemed to chase away the oppressive darkness. Aurora stood at the edge of the alcove, her ears swiveling as she gazed out into the storm. Martha approached her, rubbing her hand along the mare's neck. "What is it, girl?" she whispered. "What are you trying to show us?" Aurora let out a soft whinny, her breath visible in the frigid air. She pawed at the ground, her gaze fixed on the snow-covered trail ahead. Martha followed her line of sight, but saw only swirling snow and shadows. Owen joined them, his face pale from the cold. "Do you think we're close?" Martha nodded. "I think so. Aurora wouldn't lead us this far if it wasn't important." As the storm raged on, they huddled around the fire, sharing sips of water and bites of dried meat. Despite the warmth of the flames, an unspoken tension hung in the air. Both mother and son knew they were venturing into the unknown, and the uncertainty was as chilling as the wind outside. After what felt like hours, the storm began to subside, the howling wind giving way to an eerie stillness. Martha and Owen extinguished the fire and prepared to continue their journey. Aurora was eager to move, her hooves crunching against the snow as she resumed her determined pace. The tracks were harder to see now, partially obscured by the fresh snowfall, but Aurora followed them with unwavering focus. The trail led them to a narrow pass between two towering cliffs. The air was deathly quiet, save for the sound of their breathing and Aurora's steady steps. Martha's heart pounded as they entered the pass, the walls of stone looming over them like silent sentinels. "This place gives me the creeps," Owen muttered, gripping the rope he had tied around his waist for support. Martha didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Aurora, who had stopped abruptly in the middle of the pass. The mare's ears were pinned back, and her nostrils flared as she pawed at the snow-covered ground. "Why'd she stop?" Owen asked, his voice tinged with unease. Martha dismounted, her boots sinking into the snow as she approached Aurora. The mare snorted softly, lowering her head to sniff the ground. Martha crouched beside her, brushing away the snow with her gloved hands. What she uncovered made her heart skip a beat. Beneath the thin layer of snow was a faint, shallow indentation in the ground, a clue that something had been buried there. The edges of the depression were uneven, as if whatever had been there had been hastily concealed. "What is it?" Owen asked, his voice tight with curiosity and fear. Martha didn't answer immediately. She continued to dig, her hands trembling as she unearthed a small, weathered piece of wood. It was partially rotted and covered in dirt, but its shape was unmistakable. It was part of a box. "This was buried here," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why?" Owen knelt beside her, helping to clear away more snow. As they worked, they unearthed more fragments of wood, along with scraps of fabric and bits of rusted metal. Aurora stood nearby, her eyes watchful and her breath steady. As the final remnants of the storm cleared, revealing a star-filled sky above, Martha and Owen realized they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. The air was cold and still as Martha and Owen worked feverishly to unearth the hidden mystery. Aurora stood nearby, her dark mane ruffling in the slight breeze, her gaze fixed intently on their efforts. Each handful of snow and dirt revealed more fragments of the buried box, and with every discovery, their anticipation grew. "It's bigger than I thought," Owen muttered, brushing away snow with his gloved hands. He paused, his breath fogging in the cold air, and looked at his mother. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know," Martha admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But someone went through a lot of trouble to bury it out here." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last layer of snow was cleared. What lay before them was a wooden chest, weathered and partially rotted from the elements. Its iron hinges were rusted, and the lid bore deep grooves, as though someone had carved it hastily with a knife. The initials RM were faintly visible. Owen ran his fingers over the letters. "RM. Any idea who that could be?" Martha shook her head. "Not off the top of my head. But we won't know anything until we open it." The chest's hinges groaned in protest as Martha and Owen pried it open. Inside was a treasure trove of items that made them both gasp. The first thing they saw was a bundle of old, tattered papers tied together with fraying twine. Beside it were two books, their covers cracked and their pages yellowed with age. A faded photograph sat on top of the pile, its edges curled. It depicted a man standing proudly with a horse that looked strikingly like Aurora. "That can't be," Owen whispered, lifting the photograph carefully. "Is that Aurora?" Martha studied the image, her eyes widening. "It has to be. Look at the markings on her face. They're identical." The resemblance was undeniable. Aurora's unique blaze and the white stockings on her hind legs matched perfectly with the horse in the photograph. But the image was old, decades old. "Who is this man?" Owen asked, flipping the photograph over. Scrawled on the back in faded ink were the words, "With Storm, 1893. "Storm?" Martha whispered, glancing at Aurora. "Do you think she's somehow connected to this horse?" Owen shook his head, clearly overwhelmed. "But that doesn't make sense. Aurora's only 10 years old." Martha carefully set the photograph aside and began sifting through the rest of the chest. The papers were filled with handwritten notes, maps, and journal entries, all penned in the same elegant script. As she read the words aloud, a story began to unfold. The story of Storm. The journal belonged to a man named Robert Morgan, a rancher who had once lived in Cedar Valley over a century ago. He had written extensively about his life and his beloved horse, Storm. Storm, it seemed, wasn't just a companion, but a vital partner in Robert's life, helping him navigate the rugged terrain, herd cattle, and even save lives during harsh winters. But one entry stood out. It described a fateful winter when Storm had led Robert to a stranded traveler, a young woman who had been caught in a blizzard. Robert credited Storm with saving the woman's life, guiding them both back to safety when Robert himself had nearly given up hope. The final pages of the journal revealed a bittersweet truth. Robert had buried the chest as a tribute to Storm after the horse passed away. The chest contained items that symbolized their bond. The photograph, a lock of Storm's mane tied with ribbon, and a small metal horseshoe charm. Martha's voice cracked as she read the last words in the journal aloud. Storm was more than a horse. He was my friend, my savior. I can only hope his spirit roams these hills forever, guiding those in need as he guided me. Owen sat back on his heels, his face pale. Do you think Aurora, could she be connected to Storm in some way? Like she's his descendant? Martha looked at Aurora, who was watching them with an almost otherworldly calm. The mare stepped forward, her hooves crunching softly in the snow, and nuzzled the chest gently. I don't know, Martha said quietly, but it's like she knew this was here, like she was drawn to it. A legacy reclaimed. As the sun rose, casting warm light over the snow-covered valley, Martha and Owen packed up the chest carefully. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had uncovered something more than just a relic of the past. Aurora's behavior, the uncanny resemblance to Storm, and the journal's words all pointed to a deeper connection. When they returned to the farm, Martha began piecing together Robert Morgan's story using the papers and maps they had found. She discovered that his ranch had once stood near the base of the mountains not far from their own property. The house was long gone, but its foundation remained, hidden beneath years of overgrowth. Martha decided to honor Robert and Storm's legacy by restoring the site. With Owen's help, she cleared the land and erected a small memorial stone etched with the words, "In memory of Robert Morgan and Storm, whose bond will forever guide the lost." Aurora seemed to sense the significance of their work. She stood quietly near the stone as they worked, her presence a constant source of strength and comfort. The mystery lives on. As the seasons changed and winter gave way to spring, Aurora's behavior returned to normal. She no longer stared at the horizon for hours as though searching for something. Instead, she roamed the fields with a newfound peace, her movements graceful and unburdened. But the story didn't end there. One crisp morning, as Martha prepared Aurora's feed, she noticed a stranger at the edge of the property. The man was elderly, his frame stooped, but his eyes sharp. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on Aurora. "Is that your horse?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. Martha nodded, her curiosity piqued. "Yes, her name's Aurora." The man smiled faintly. "She reminds me of a horse I once saw in a photograph. My grandfather used to tell me stories about a horse named Storm and how he saved a young woman in a snowstorm." Martha's breath caught. "Your grandfather wouldn't happen to be Robert Morgan, would he?" The man's eyes widened. "How do you know that name?" Martha told him everything about Aurora, the chest, and the journal. The man listened intently, tears glistening in his eyes as he held the photograph of Robert and Storm. "This was my grandfather's greatest treasure," he said softly. "Thank you for finding it and for honoring his memory." Aurora nickered softly, her ears swiveling toward the man. He reached out to stroke her neck, his weathered hand trembling slightly. "You've got a remarkable horse here," he said. "She's carrying on a legacy, a bond that transcends time." As the man departed, Martha stood by Aurora's side, her heart full. She knew they had uncovered more than just a story. They had become part of it. And as Aurora gazed out over the horizon, her ears flicking toward the distant mountains, Martha felt a deep sense of gratitude for the mysterious.